What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 18 of Facts on the Ground. I'm joined, as always, by my co host, Misty Winston. And today we're talking to Sam Carliner, who is an independent journalist and press freedom activist whose interests are foreign policy and breaking up media monopolies. He hosts a podcast called Newsdive, which focuses on covering underreported news and emphasizing problems in press freedom and ethics. And as a journalist just entering the field, his focus is in finding ways to make it easier for young journalists to go the independent route and not have to succumb to the corporate route. And he has a piece up at Medium, at his Medium site that discusses this. We'll talk about some of that today. So, Sam, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, okay, you're like a brand new journalist, like fresh out of journalism school, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what was your experience like? Because I've heard from a lot of people who have gone to journalism school that it is kind of very corporate friendly, like that's sort of the way that they like sort of push you, encourage you to go. What was your experience like when you were in journalism school?
Yeah, it's very corporate friendly. It is, I would say, go beyond corporate friendly. I'd say it's become, maybe it always was, definitely become a tool of corporate media to get young people to keep them alive. And that's sort of the thing that I guess since I realized it after declaring my major, have been trying to complain about because, as was said, I like going the independent route. I had to dig and search for independent outlets because the school I paid a lot of money to didn't really feel like bringing those outlets in and introducing them to people.
One of the things you talk about is that these programs, if you go to their websites, I think your mother pointed this out in the piece you mentioned, your
So,
mother
yeah.
out the piece you wrote, that she noticed very quickly that almost all of these sites are branded or not so subtly affiliated in some way with the corporate news outlets. It's almost as if they're proud that they're this mill that churns out good corporate journalists or producers. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, I can't talk about like every single school in detail, but definitely my school through I'd say anyone who wasn't majoring in TV under the bus to the point where journalism opportunities or journalism because it was not that good quality were given to people studying who were good at producing video, good at reading a newscast, but the students who I would say showed more interest and more strength in doing the research, asking questions, and all were sort of secondary. And I mean, as said, like if you go to any website, the directors of schools are almost always have some background in cable news. I'm not gonna name names because that's not yet where I'm at in my trying to do things, but I will say that the director of my school worked in sports media, had a big background in sports media, which not to knock sports media. I'm not a sports media person myself. I know a lot of people like it, so I don't want to make enemies. But I do think that does not qualify you to be running a school that has a lot of programs. Maybe run the sports program, or I guess definitely run the sports program. But if that does not qualify you to teach people and lead the way on. Here's how you cover news, and it's very much of a it trickles down from the top into what faculty are able to discuss and talk about, and then what students learn about and show interest in.
Well, I think that that's actually also kind of a really good point too, because it's not necessarily just corporate journalism. There also isn't like a focus or a push towards investigative journalism, and I think that's the biggest thing that we're losing right now. We don't have a lot of journalists out there right now who are still doing any investigative reporting. I mean, we still have like the John Pilgers, and I mean, we now have like a Max Blumenthal or Ben Norton who are doing great things at Gray Zone, but they're few and far between. I mean, most of the people who are getting into news are, just looking to be news readers. Is that kind of what you experienced too? Just seeing that, it's not really so much focused on doing any of the research and investigation yourself. It's more focused on, just learning how to read a teleprompter.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say I never had they had somewhat of a separate between people interested in TV and people interested in journalism. So I never had to learn how to read a teleprompter. The problem is because they place so much emphasis on the students who want to read a teleprompter, the people who would write news are encouraged to write it in a way where it fits that style. And love taking my time with my writing style, maybe a bit too much at times, but I say the more detail the better. But it's just about every class I had was here's how you shorten it, here's how you make it crisp, here's how you make an audience keep interest, and then if not that, if they are like, oh, yes, you can write more long form, you can write long form, but the thing that comes first is how do you make it pitchable? If no one's clicking on it, no one's going to read it, which to some extent may be true, but I would argue that if enough news outlets decide, screw it, we don't care about your clicks, we'll just write it and expect that you'll come to it, there's an audience that will come to it. I mean, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but it would just be a regular thing, a regular theme in my class where a professor would ask the students, okay, so are you guys more interested in like these short form videos, like, I don't know, and now this? Or do you like maybe, a bit more detail, a bit longer? And you could always tell they're phrasing it where they're expecting people to go with the now this approach. And I'd say usually like the larger half of students, maybe like 60-40, the 60% would always be like, no, we like longer, we like detail, to which we would almost always get the response of, oh, okay, well, the studies are showing that people your age like the shorter form, so we're going to focus on how to do the shorter form. So it's just this disregard for because one thing I make in my article is a lot of young journalists know stuff is wrong. The problem is we're constantly told, no, nothing's wrong, and we're going to ignore that and just point you in the direction of what's already happening and accepted.
Well, I think that's a part to do with like the whole 24-hour news cycle. Everything has to fit in these cute little sound bites and, move along in a pattern. And it's because news has become a business instead of, being focused on, informing people, educating people, that it's now more about, getting the soundbite that you can repeat 74 times a day because you have 24 hours to fill, rather than it is about, really digging into the information. And that really just leaves us with a lot of really uninformed people in the country. So yeah, I think that's become a really big problem. So I'm glad that we're talking about this, because it's really become pervasive over the past, I would say, probably 10 to 15 years. And then, I mean, really probably longer, but I'd say it's really kind of escalated. And then mix that in with the attacks from government forces on journalism and the media. And we're in a really bad situation as far as journalism goes. What kind, being that you're new into the journalism world, are you hearing from people who have been around for a while that maybe you've spoken to, maybe mentors or whatever, that they've kind of noticed that the direction that journalism is taking?
I mean, it's weird because I've had mentors who have absolutely been supportive of the points I make. They aren't the journalism mentors. Like the school I went to, I was in the journalism major, but then there was a mix of different majors. There was like just general communication studies, which I regret not being that major because that's where they talk about like Chomsky and everything that's come from that, Marx, whatever how media is shaped. I wish I'd taken that major. And I'd say a lot of my mentors came more from that department. But in the journalism department myself, it's there's people who I've had some respect for in that they've come through for me in times where I needed them to come through for me, but their general understanding of how dire things are getting was not there.
Mhm.
I had one professor at one point tell me that, we all go in wanting to do, the big game changing journalism, but if you find that that's not suiting you financially, there's actually a really big market right now where businesses will pay you to write a news story and you work in their article. So that might be a thing worth pursuing, to which I think I just didn't say anything because I don't think there's anything you even can say to that.
Yeah,
I would complain, but I don't know what even to say to that if that's the thing you're suggesting.
you can laugh at it and walk away. That's about it.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, as Misty alluded to earlier. It's about business. It's about entertainment. It's about infotainment. And if you go back to the first episode of the show, which I'm not trying to plug, I interviewed Tarek Haddad, who used to work for Newsweek, and now he's more on the independent tip. I'm not sure exactly what projects he's working on now, but I know he's been pretty diligent about covering Assange's extradition hearing. But one of the things that was remarkable to me that he made me aware of is that at the Newsweek offices in London, at least the floor or the division he worked in, it was essentially people sitting at computers typing out stories that they were assigned by. I think in one case there was a sports editor who was assigned to be Tarek's boss, but was sending him stories about Syria, for example, to write. And then if Tarek didn't toe the right line, whether the facts were there or not, this guy would come down on him. And in the end, Tarek ended up leaving because it was essentially journalism sweatshop, kind of like a more corporatized version of the Vice sweatshop in Brooklyn. So, how can one call that journalism? Do you think it's even fair to call that journalism? It seems like such a disgrace to the profession. And
Yeah.
that's not to knock people who are doing that work, because people have to work. Not everybody can be out there like Cy Hirsch, but do you think it's fair to even call that journalism?
I would say no. I mean, one thing I've been trying to do is that I only really use the term journalist, or I try to only use the term journalist for people who are doing what I would consider work that holds people accountable. I think, for example, when you saw the cable outlets showing the terrible, horrible riots and ignoring the fact that police were attacking their own reporters, I think that was where I really started calling them reporters instead of journalists, because, and even reporters maybe a bit, I think, too good of a title. But I definitely think there needs to start being a distinction between who we call a journalist and who we call someone putting out some form of
Jimmy
content.
Dore calls them news actors, and I think that that's very appropriate. I think news actors is a really good term for those people, because they're not journalists, they're not reporters, they're really just somebody sitting in front of a camera acting and reading their lines. So I think that that's a perfect description. So
They're
if you
national
guys want to
security
steal
state
that,
commissars.
no, go ahead. What'd you say?
They're national security state commissars, essentially.
Yeah, so true.
And I like using commissar because they're all afraid of Russia.
But it really is kind of, it really speaks to how dire the situation in journalism is today. It really doesn't exist. I mean, that's an unfair, dramatic way to put it, because it does. There are people, like a Max Blumenthal or like a Cy Hirsch who's still out there, kicking ass. So, but it's really frustrating to me because I'm somebody who's kind of the belief that the fight over narrative and the fight over the truth is really the front lines of all of the other fights that we face. I've said it a million times. If you want to fight for healthcare, if you want to fight for ending the wars, if you want to fight for free college, any of those things, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have the ability to dispense proper information and educate people on your positions. And it's really difficult to do that right now. I mean, if you look at, the narrative around like Medicare for all, how much of it is just total garbage that has been fed to people by mainstream media. These are people who were supposed to be trusting to give us information and inform us and educate us about things that are important to us and that impact our lives, and they're failing miserably. So I really just think that this is such an important conversation to have. I wish more people were having it. Journalism is in a really bad way right now, and I don't know how to save it. Getting the corporate money out of it is obviously ideal, but how do you even make that happen? So as somebody who's kind of focusing on how to make independent media appeal more to younger journalists, what are some of your ideas? Like what do you think we can do to get kind of these new kids who are coming straight out of journalism school to not be dragged into the corporate money pit of despair?
Well, I mean, one thing that I guess, been saying nonstop for at least a year now is that, at least in my experience, people my age, independent media already appeals to us. I like to think my generation is not stupid, and is very good at spotting bullshit. Where the problem lies is not that they're not seeing the problem; it's that they're not seeing the alternative. Because, I mean, just any time you walk by a TV in any news setting, it's a 24/7 network, because you're not going to queue up a bunch of. I mean, I would have a lot of respect for a school that queues up just a bunch of YouTube journalists to put on their TVs. But no, it's just easy. Put on the cable channels. Oh, look, we're a news school. Plus, you have the big cable outlets have internship programs, and for a bunch of young people going into a whole lot of debt who need money. I went to school with first generation students who are not white men like me, who are going to have more difficulties, having massive internship programs from these outlets at schools, being like, you can make a name for yourself if you get one of these internships, makes it really, really easy for people to put aside a lot of their values and think, okay, I'm not the person who's spreading a lot of the horrible worst parts of these outlets. I'm just writing a news package for them here and there. And I think, and with faculty not really actually introducing people to independent outlets on their own, that screws it over more. So what I really think is the way to go is, there's already a hunger for independent outlets, and independent outlets should be, and not necessarily just college campuses. I don't think you need to be in college to be a journalist, but I think college campuses are a big place where you have a lot of people passionate about journalism that would love to hear about the alternatives. I don't entirely know how to make that happen, because it's not like independent outlets have the resources to constantly be like, hey, we're here, you should talk to us. They don't have as many internship programs. But I think if there's a way for them, and I'm sure with the help of certain faculty, I'm sure would love to have them on board, even certain students, to get them talking to the younger people and introducing themselves, people would be going to them a lot faster, a lot more frequently. I think the problem is just that a lot of times you have to be on Twitter for a long time to then discover people, and then through those people discover more people. And I think, I don't know exactly how, but there need to be certain more ways for people to hear about independent outlets and explore them.
I agree. And going back to these sort of internship recruitment events or happenings on your campus, can you talk about the one that happened with Joy Reid?
Yeah. Well, I never attended it, so I don't know the specifics of what it was, but the gist was it was a conversation on race in media. I know Colin Kaepernick, I think it was at the heat of when he was getting a lot of flack for protesting. They also had Soledad O'Brien, but I just stick with Joy Reid because honestly, I didn't have the interest in complaining about both of them. I think Joy Reid sums it up. But I think it's just Joy Reid is not a person you should be asking about race in media, given how blatantly Islamophobic she is.
Mhm.
I mean, now she's one of the newer, not newer. I mean, she was always pretty pro Rushgate, but now she's like a hot spot for Rushgate since she's
Well,
got a
they,
primetime
in
show.
all fairness, they hacked her Twitter account and
Yes.
tweeted this Islamophobic statement. So,
Yeah. But I don't know. I think, and regardless of what people think of Bernie Sanders, getting a body language expert to come on her show and call an old Jewish man seedy and dishonest, and you can see it in this, this, and this. Like, I'm sure, like, I don't doubt that she has had a lot of trouble as a black woman in media, so I don't want to downplay that she's, I'm sure, gone through her own struggles, legitimate struggles, but that doesn't change the fact that a lot of the ways she has been able to rise is by playing the, okay, well, I'll say horrible things about the other groups we're able to say horrible things about on corporate media. And so I think it's just telling that my school is right outside New York City. I can't list all of them off the top of my head, but I don't doubt that there's plenty of leading independent journalists who can talk about racism and how it affects your ability to do media. And they got a homophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobe to be the person to talk about that. I think
Well,
that's
and not
very...
only is Joy Reid not the person to be talking to about race in media, she's just not the person who should be talking about media. She
mhm.
is one of those propagandist mouthpieces for power. And that's, I mean, I don't feel bad about saying that at all. That's absolutely what she is. That's why she has the job that she has. So I think that I don't, and I admire you for wanting to get journalism schools to kind of be more proactive about pushing more of an independent line. I just don't know that they're going to do that because I think that there is this they're kind of interwoven now. The journalism schools and the mainstream media, the corporate media, they have this very cushy relationship, and it's really like a pipeline. And they're training their future propagandists. They're training the people, and the people who will become the future MSNBC reporters are the people who are most effective at getting their minds right and being willing to say whatever they're told to say and not worry about the consequences of it. So yeah, not only is Joy Reid, she just to me, if I were in journalism, she's not anybody I would ever look up to. That's not journalism to me. So do you think that that's true though, that there's just too much of this connection now between journalism schools and corporate media? That do you think it's even possible to get them to have a more independent friendly approach to how they talk to their students?
I think it is. I mean, I agree with you. They're not going to do it on their own. They benefit a lot from having partnerships with really well-funded outlets. But I think it's you're not going to get an uprising from within MSNBC itself. I do think colleges are still a significant part of structuring and stabilizing the role of cable media, where there is still some wiggle room for pushing back. And one of the things, I think maybe the thing I'm proudest of so far in my short life is I spent a good 3-4 years just always complaining to my professors, writing about the stuff, trying to get other students to speak up. A lot of them were supportive silently, but also afraid of their career prospects, which, as much as I don't agree, I can't shame them because a lot of them needed more security than I did. But I, the I guess final semester of mine was the Rona semester. I and it was just interesting watching all of the internships that were supposed to be lined up for hardworking students going away right before their eyes. And it was something I'd been telling the administration forever. If you are not preparing people to adapt to the horrible, chaotic world we live in, and you're only preparing them to go along with a very specific and very damaging approach to media, they could be incredible at what they do. They could be super hardworking, and they're gonna get screwed over because these outlets are monopolizing more and more. They're giving less and less room for people who do question their approach. And that happened. The economy crashed, and a lot of people's futures they had been told by their school were there for them were whisked away out of nowhere. So I wrote an opinion piece in my school paper, which was basically saying all that. Hey, I had been telling you guys this. Now a lot of my classmates are getting screwed over because you didn't prepare them with more universal and, quite frankly, more ethical skills. And I have since found out before I wrote the article, the school was like, okay, we're gonna change up our curriculum a little bit. They didn't specifically apparently know what they were gonna do, but they were like, we're a new school, let's reassess our curriculum. And I was told that in those talks, my piece was cited. A mentor of mine who I love to death, probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, had actually pushed for it to be required readings for students. I think that's a bit much, but I respect it. But there were multiple faculty pushing for, hey, this article actually brings up a lot of things we didn't consider. Maybe we should look at it. And I've since found out that, though I won't get to experience it, future students are going to now be learning about journalism and entertainment separately. You choose, do you want to work in entertainment or do you want to work in journalism? I'm sure that won't resolve all the problems, but I think it does show that colleges, because I'm sure mine isn't unique, colleges still have enough people who do genuinely believe in education, genuinely believe in discourse, and genuinely care about their students. I think there's and also mixed with the fact that there are a lot of students who really like independent media when they hear about it. I think those two factors mean that it would be a lot easier for independent media to break into a campus than it would into the larger political discourse and media scene.
Yeah, that's a good point. And congratulations on having that incorporated into the required reading. I think that is.
And good.
Oh, it's not. It was proposed, but it did shift the curriculum a bit.
Yeah, but good for you for speaking out about it. I mean, I think a lot of people don't want to rock the boat too much. But like you said, you do experience a certain level of privilege, and some of your classmates aren't able to say those things because they do need a job, to pay off their student loans or whatever. I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying you don't need a job. But I think that there is a certain level of privilege that comes with being a white male in journalism that, a lot of people just can't take that kind of a risk. I mean, even like an Aaron Matei has been on Jimmy Dore and has openly admitted, look, some of us have to worry about paying our bills. Like, we have to be careful about what we say and who we say it to. And there's a certain level of caution you have to take because you don't want to get kind of blackballed from the industry or whatever. And that sucks that it's like that. And I can't hate on an Aaron Matei who does amazing work, who also has to kind of tiptoe around certain subjects or be, careful about what he says about certain people. I think that something that I think will help is the fact that, like you called it earlier, kind of YouTube journalism, there are so many options for people who want to go into independent media. There are so many platforms that they can get onto, or there's so many ways that they can market themselves on the internet. Do you think that that's been beneficial? I know that, over the past maybe 5-10 years, it's really gotten more difficult due to, YouTube algorithms and all of that stuff. But have you noticed that that's become, something that kids are more interested in, where they can just kind of produce their entire show on their own and they don't have to worry about having a boss or any of that stuff?
I think absolutely. I mean, everyone I think my age has. I don't have a Substack, but everyone my age has a Substack at this point. Podcasts, of course, are super easy. I guess super easy. For me at least. I'm sure for other people not. But and YouTube, I don't know as many of my classmates on YouTube. I'm sure there are some, but yeah, no, I think the independent lane absolutely makes it easier to cover what you want without censorship. Where I do still think it's a problem is that you still have to worry about it if a employer that you have in the meantime before you sort of make it big finds what your actual news views are. But I do think the fact that people are able to be more independent for getting their names out there is making a big difference. I think that's one thing that I've seen with the protests against police brutality is that a lot of, because one thing that's really drilled into your head in formal journalism schools, oh, you need to be objective, keep your opinion out of it, which is bullshit, because if you keep your opinion out of it, what you're doing is you're just then giving more weight to the opinion that's already dominating the narrative, which is the black people deserve to be killed horrible opinion. Mm-hmm. And one thing I saw was a lot of people, particularly photojournalists I know, being like, I don't care if I'm supposed to give equal weights to both sides. Obviously, this is an issue of the government is murdering black people, attacking protesters, targeting journalists, and it's not a matter of opinion to say, hey, this is stupid, we should absolutely be fighting back against this. So I definitely think the people being able to start their own platforms and have their own platforms is shifting a lot of the how much you choose to tiptoe around things.
I'm really glad you kind of brought up having keeping your bias out of it as a journalist, because as soon as you said that, every time somebody says that, the only journalist that I know who does that and is very effective at it, he's a video journalist. His name's Ford Fisher. He's been covering the protests. Dude's a genius. All he does is show up with a camera. He records what's happening, and then he shows you the video. And that's what he does. He just shows you what's happening on the ground. And he's very good at keeping his own personal stuff out of it. And he just records the video and leaves it up to the public. And he's very good at what he does. But you're right. There is no way as a human being to keep your opinion out of some of these topics, nor should you. It's ridiculous to even suggest that that's possible.
Well, yeah.
When you're talking about imperialism and war, you should have an opinion on that. It's okay.
Yeah, as Robert Fisk has said many times, if you're reporting on the Middle East or you're reporting on the protests, you're not reporting on a football match. It's not, hey, this team did this and this team did this. And he always brings up the example of if you were a journalist at the time of the liberation of Auschwitz and you were writing about the atrocities there, you're not going to give equal space to the victims and Gestapo, right? Or an SS guard. You're going to focus on the victim story, because that's not just because it's a story. It's, I think, ethically where your journalistic focus should go is with the victims. Always empathize with the victims, because it's usually some form of power, some form of concentrated power that is causing them to be victims. And as Fisk also says, not to crib on him too much, but the job of journalism primarily is to monitor the centers of power, especially when they lie to us in service of war and imperialism. So this idea that you can be a serious journalist and report on what's happening in the world, whether it's the protests or what's happening with the sham extradition hearing of Julian Assange, how pervasive in the school you went to was that idea that this 50-50 I'm objective all the time philosophy is possible or can even produce anything close to good journalism? How pervasive was that attitude?
I mean, I can't think of any specific examples. That may say on its own how pervasive it was. It's the norm. It's the idea that you need to, like a piece can't run unless you have one person saying a thing and then one person saying the opposite, which also ignores the fact that usually it's not as simple as someone saying one thing, someone saying the opposite thing. There's way more than two perspectives, I think, in just about any case. And I think that's another area where talking to classmates, they can always tell this doesn't feel right, but when the people who are supposed to be the experts and who you're paying a lot of money to be the experts are being like, no, this is how you do it, it's hard to believe that that's not how you do it. And I think it was an article from Portland. I forget the name of the journalist, but she wrote a whole piece about her experience covering Portland. And at the end, there was a great line, which was something like by trying to not include your own voice, you both come from nowhere and something like you come from nowhere, and it just gives more weight to whatever the dominant narrative is. And people, my classmates who saw that I shared it, read it, and were like, oh shit, I didn't even realize that was an option. That's actually a really good point. So I think it's telling that these really obvious conclusions are not reached, not because people are stupid, but because the people who are supposed to be the smart ones that we look up to are gaslighting us into thinking that it's not an option.
Right.
I also want to, I don't want to like go into too many different things, but this is a topic I have a lot of thoughts on. I think another thing that really I always say to the idea that journalists shouldn't give their opinions is, if we're doing our jobs right, we're grossly glued to the news cycle. Like I am constantly dying. Like I feel like most of my work isn't even the actual covering the news; it's the reading the news in the first place. And let's be honest, most Americans don't really care about the news cycle. If they do, it's light. Not that that means they shouldn't give their opinions. I think everyone has some background where they should be allowed to give their opinions. But if you're someone who is, by your very job, constantly trying to understand and pay attention to what's going on in the news, then you absolutely should be one of the people speaking the most on it and sharing your perspective on it, because you're coming from a place of constant research, constant consumption. So why would you not have an opinion on it that is worth sharing with people?
Well, I think something I have a big problem with too is that it seems like we've gotten so wrapped up and we have to respect everybody's opinion and we have to, give equal time to everybody's position. So we find these newscasts where, we have like a scientist talking about climate change and he's got, facts and all this stuff to back him up. And then we have some guy from, Tennessee who just doesn't think that that's real. And it gives equal weight to an opinion that really shouldn't be given equal weight to. So it's actually kind of really a dangerous form of journalism where you're propping up, you know, kind of these ill-advised ideas. And I'm not saying that you can't talk about the fact that there are people who deny climate change or think the earth is flat or whatever. You can talk about it. But I think it gives equal weight when you have, you know, an expert in the field and then you have somebody who has no idea really what's going on, but just has an opinion on it just because, you know, we have to respect that position too. We don't. We really don't. There shouldn't be, there's no rule, there's no law in the Constitution that says that if something is reported on CNN, the opposite opinion also gets equal airtime. That's not a thing. So I don't think that, you know, this whole respectability journalism, it's like respectability politics. I'm not for it. It doesn't make any sense. If your opinion sucks, then it shouldn't be given equal measure. So hopefully that's something that we'll kind of pull out of as more independent media kind of crops up. But even I wanted to talk to you too, because even I've noticed, even in independent media, there are a lot of issues. You know, I'm very active in the, you know, free Assange movement and, you know, fighting back against the extradition. And I have to fight with independent content creators to get them to cover that. And this is something that influences their job. You know, it could end their job. And it doesn't seem like they really care. We've been told by a couple different people that they won't cover it because it affects their amount of clicks. We've had somebody else say that they won't cover it because it affects their income. And so it's definitely, I think in independent media, the problem is that yes, they're not being paid by corporate overlords, but they are dependent on appealing to the broadest base of viewers so that they can get, you know, a lot of subscriptions, a lot of Patreons and all of that stuff. So I think a certain level of self-censoring just naturally happens. So how do you think that we can kind of combat that issue, you know, to make sure that we keep independent media a truly independent space that isn't worried about access and all of that stuff?
I'm still thinking of that one because I mean, and we talked about this when you were on my show, that it's if we had the answer, we wouldn't be worrying about it right now. Um,
It is
but
tough.
that, yeah. I mean, my thing is, I can understand the idea of I do need clicks, I do need money, I do need to have an audience. So then when there's another thing I want to cover, I can cover it. Where I don't really believe that that's the full thing is that a lot of these people can't even be bothered to retweet the people who are covering it. Like if you don't have the time or resources or freedom to cover it yourself, okay, there's still people out there who are covering it, and you can share their work. So that's really where it's. I'm still trying to process what reason would there be to not, but I do think that it really just needs to be demonstrated. If their whole concern is that it's going to affect their money and their clicks, it needs to be shown that the people covering it right now are really benefiting, and the people not covering it right now aren't benefiting. And I I hate that that's the topic because I don't think that something as important as a trial for the future of press freedom should be reduced to something as grossly capitalist as I'm covering this because I know I'll make money off of covering it. I think that's horrible. But I do think if that's what it takes for it to get coverage, and I think, yeah, I think it really is their audiences need to nag them to cover it and start taking their money and subscribing to other people if these outlets continue to not cover it, because I don't know what else would get them to change their minds.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think you're absolutely right. I really do think that it's going to take the viewers of these people, you know, to hit them up on Twitter or to, you know, jump into a comment section of a live stream and ask them to cover it. You don't have to be a dick. I am, but that's just because I'm frustrated. But you don't have to be. You can be nice and you can ask them politely. I've been asking them politely for a long time. It's not worked out so well. But maybe if more people do it, they'll listen. It's really something that has troubled me over the past, certainly year and a half since Julian's arrest. When I have to fight with people who are supposed to be in independent media to cover a historic court case on press freedom, it's really alarming to me. I don't understand it. I don't think people recognize the position we find ourselves in and how serious it is. But it's really depressing and frustrating to deal with. The home of progressives, yes, I'll call them out. I'm probably going to get yelled at for calling them out, but the home of progressives, I mean, it's a historic court case and a legendary whistleblower testifies, Daniel Ellsberg, and not a word, not a peep. They had 5, 6, 7 videos about how Trump said something stupid, but not a word. And it took us yelling at them and asking them and getting into their super chat and then people shaming them for them to even do one video on it. And that's really kind of scary to me, because
And is it still not on YouTube?
it is. I think they finally posted
good.
it yesterday because I tweeted them, thank you. Listen, I'll be a dick to you and like push you to cover it, but once you do, I will retweet it. I will praise you. I will say thank you. Like that's what we're here for. But yeah, so it's just really unfortunate that it took that amount of public pressure for the largest independent media network on YouTube to do anything about a case as huge as this. And before they posted that video, they hadn't said anything since the day, I think it's the day after his arrest. And then before that, it was like a year. And before that, it was like 3 years. So Assange is not something that they've been covering regularly. People will try to make excuses for them and say that nothing's been happening in the case. And you clearly haven't been following the case because there's been a lot going on. There's been plenty to cover. I mean, there's a huge scandal about a Spanish security firm spying on anybody and everybody who walked into the embassy, including having microphones in the women's restroom. I think that
Of Mike Pompeo, CIA.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that seems newsworthy, especially amongst independent content creators, you would think.
It's a chaotic case. Like, I don't know that, I mean, I guess excluding foreign policy, which I guess it's connected to, but I can't think of a story that I have paid attention to that has been more chaotic than the Assange case.
There's always something.
It's movie shit. Like it is things that I feel like a nut job telling people with a straight face because it sounds like a thriller government movie plot and not a thing that you would ever process happening in real life.
That's what the journalist from ABC in Australia said when she interviewed Stella Morris. They were talking about how they were all spied on, and she said, "This sounds like a spy novel." And Stella's like, "But it's not. This is my life. This is real life. They're trying to steal my baby's diaper to get DNA to prove that he's Julian's son." And that's not something that an independent content creator would want to talk about. To me, that seems interesting and newsworthy, but that's just me.
For me, it was... Oh, sorry. You talk.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, for me, it was... I feel awful because I don't remember his name, but the witness who spoke on Friday, who was taken to custody in Macedonia, tortured.
Al-Masri. Yeah.
Yeah. That, I mean, I think of all the things, that was the one that blew my mind, which wasn't even, it was Assange related, but his story wasn't even like things that we necessarily know they did pertaining to the Assange trial. It's just things that they did to him. And like, it's even for me, who has been very quick to be pissed at the Department of Defense from an obscenely young age. That's one of the few consistent things that I've been quite far left on, is not trusting the Department of Defense. The amount of stuff they did to me, like, I still can't grapple with the fact that happened in real life, because it shows the horrifying reach that the U.S. has, like that they're getting Germany to not to not try the people that they're approaching his kids. I heard it explained in Unauthorized Disclosure, Kevin Gostola, Rania Kalick podcast. If anyone's listening haven't heard it, it's like one of the most terrifying things I've ever listened to in my life. The way they explain it.
Mhm.
And the fact that there's not any videos that, to my knowledge, that have been made about that. I don't even think Jimmy Dore's covered that aspect of the case, and he's been probably the most consistent independent content creator on covering Assange. To me, that's something that people need to know about. But again, it also just, I mean, if you want to understand the kind of journalist that Julian Assange is, this is a man who was already told, because he had spoken out in court before, that if you speak out again, we're going to remove you from your own trial. And when the judge decided that she wasn't going to let this man testify, he stood up and fought back against that and said, I will not let a victim of torture be censored in this courtroom. And that's the kind of journalist that Julian Assange is. That's the kind of person he is. He's in a fight for his life, on trial for his life, and he's worried about the torture victim who's being censored in order to crucify him. So, I mean, that's the kind of journalist that he is. So I just want to make sure that we get that out there.
Yeah, and I think that Julian's situation, if you want to call it that, his career and now his current plight, that's putting it mildly, it really brings to light how much hard work goes into being a serious journalist who's concerned with not just providing information, but information in service of humanity, in service of indicting war criminals. And it's hard, dirty, dangerous work. And
yeah, I think that's a good point to make too, Jesse. It's not just hard work. There's a lot of risk that goes into that.
Right.
And like you said, true journalism is exposing the powerful, and that's never going to make you, friends that the friends that you want. It's going to make you a lot of very powerful, very crazy enemies.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in our interview with Juan, that Seymour Hersh in a recent interview says he won't go near Assange. He looks at it as maybe he has sources who might get compromised, Seymour Hersh, or maybe he saw the extent that Julian was spied on in the embassy and decided he didn't want to deal with that. I don't know, but even veteran, some would say legendary journalists like Cy Hersh won't go near Julian Assange, to report on him, because they feel as though it's going to compromise their own work. And
when somebody is fearless, as Cy Hersh, wants nothing to do with you because it's, going to bring a world of shit onto them, you've made some powerful enemies,
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't bring that up to bash Cy Hersh. He's an incredible journalist, and I admire both him and his work. But yeah, as you just mentioned, that's the point. That's how far the fear has, and it's real fear that it's gotten among journalists who I would expect Cy Hersh to be all over covering Julian Assange. So
I think that really just brings on a whole other issue of how do we combat the reach of empire and the powerful to be able to, cause that kind of fear and censorship. But that's a whole nother level of stuff, like I don't even begin to know how to deal with all of that. I'm just trying to get, Tim Black to cover Assange.
yeah.
I'll deal with that first and then we'll move on from there. I think a big part of it is going to be making sure that Julian Assange is not extradited. I think that will certainly be helpful. If he is allowed to be extradited, that's a problem. That sets a very dangerous precedent, and every journalist around the globe will need to be very concerned for their life, for their jobs, for everything.
Right. And I don't like making predictions, but I suspect he won't get extradited, but they intend to grind him to death in Belmarsh and in
Well, there's going to be an appeal either way.
Or court next to it.
I mean, I think anybody paying attention to the case, the prosecution is getting their asses handed to them daily. Their case is being obliterated daily. I think that somebody said that the judge was going into this basically saying that he's going to be extradited unless you change my mind. I think that they've done more than enough to do that, but she's also heavily compromised. But I think you're right. I don't think that they're going to extradite him. I think that they've revealed it themselves. The plan is to keep him tangled up in court cases for the next 25 years. And, that'll effectively silence him and much of WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks has to spend a lot of their funding on legal fees and all of that stuff. It's not as easy to run a transparency website when, you're trying to save your editor's life. So yeah, I just think that's really why I get so frustrated now with independent media, because we really need those people to step up. In the absence of WikiLeaks, I'm not asking you to be the new WikiLeaks. That's a lot to ask of anybody, especially given what we've seen happen to Julian Assange. But we do need, people who are in independent media to step up and start telling stories that need to be told in a truthful way, and trying to use whatever platform they have to make an impact in that way. So I think that that's where a lot of my frustration with independent content creators lies, is that I get wanting to have lots of money and be able to buy a new camera and a new microphone for your show and whatever, but what good is that going to do if journalism is effectively squashed? That's where we're at.
Right. I agree. And just going back to what you were saying before, Sam, about, and Misty, you were saying this as well, how if not just independent media, but if mainstream media covers Assange at all, it's palace intrigue, not what's happening to him or what's been happening to him for a decade now, or almost a decade. The Times of London recently published this story headlined "Julian Assange's fiancée, Stella Morris, on their secret family." Sounds benign, but if you read between the lines there, it's not only infotainment, clickbait, it's secret family. Like, how dare he love this woman and start a family with them? How dare the CIA hire a company to spy, not only spy on this man 24/7, but psychologically torture him at the same time.
He wouldn't need to have a secret family if he weren't being persecuted for journalism. He would just be able to have a family.
Exactly. So, Sam, have you been seeing a lot of that too? Not just in independent journalism, but in mainstream journalism, that it's, again, the palace intrigue, or he was throwing feces on the wall. Have you seen that in your research and your reading as well?
Yeah, so I only really got invested in WikiLeaks and Assange last year when he was arrested. Oh God, my brain just melted. Good morning, Monday morning. That's gonna be my new thing for when I blank on a question. No, but wow, the brain just shut down.
Like, have you been seeing a lot of I think what Jesse's asking is, have you been noticing a lot of the sort of clickbaity, kind of fantastical, look at this taboo, it's very tabloidy sort of approach.
Yeah.
Especially surrounding Assange. It's not just Assange, but especially surrounding Assange. It's definitely this kind of, I think, like Jesse said, palace intrigue, trying to make it very seedy and dirty and, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And sorry, Sam, just to add on to that question, do you think that has contributed to the lack of serious coverage by serious outlets, because they see it rendered as this tabloid palace intrigue sort of thing and not a serious story, not the most serious story of our lifetimes?
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of where I was going, is that speaking from my own experience, I was young when WikiLeaks started, missed a lot of it, started paying attention when he was arrested, and casually got involved. It was only recently that I really started getting very involved. But upon casually getting involved, I very much fell for a lot of the smears, not slurs, smears, that he sexually assaulted people, that he self-invested, that I am glad to say that didn't stop me from trying to start a conversation about it, because despite believing those things, I still was more interested in he could be a horrible person. It's still really bad to extradite him. But it kept me from going as hard as I absolutely could have. And whenever I would try to look into more info on it, it would all just be those things. I don't think that's what's stopping corporate outlets from talking about him. I think they just don't care, because I don't think they pose enough of a...
Unless they can write a story like in the London Times.
Yeah. What I will say is I think that absolutely stops a lot of well-meaning people who would otherwise support him. It stops them from realizing how bad it is that other outlets aren't covering it. Like, I hate like bringing up like my classmates, me, as if that's like speaks for every single young person in journalism, but I do think a lot of it is that young people in journalism missed WikiLeaks. We were not around when it was relevant, so all we really know about Assange is the vague this and that, and he didn't do this right, and he did this bad thing. And so for that reason, we're a lot more tiptoeing, not even tiptoeing, we're not even really thinking about how bad it is that outlets aren't covering it. And one thing I will say is that my peers have learned far more about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange in the past few weeks since the trial started than they ever did from any of our professors. And I'm not even like an expert on this. I only really started actually caring about it. So the fact that I'm able to get really into it, and then through that get a lot of my peers into it, because they have been very interested, I think shows there's a very pervasive... The smears are very good at keeping people who are young and weren't around for the start of WikiLeaks. It keeps them from learning about it. But then once they do, it hasn't been super ingrained in them. So it's easy for them to unlearn it and get concerned.
I think that actually really highlights my earlier point that the battle for narrative is everything, because the propaganda campaign that was launched against Julian Assange about a decade ago has, if you're ever interested in really examining how effective it's been, the tactics they've used, it's genuinely intriguing and interesting to go back and look at the measures that they've taken. It's been very targeted and thought out and purposeful, and they've been very clear about where they want to go, what direction they want to take, how they want people to feel about him. And they've done a very good job. They've slow walked these smears one after another over the course of a decade. And when mainstream media whenever they cover Julian Assange, it's not ever a positive story. It's always the smears. It's always the propaganda against him. You don't hear about the people that he's helped or the things that he's done that has been amazing, or, even just the fact that he's exposed war crimes, and, people should be thankful for that. You never hear that stuff. So it's always this pervasive negative story over and over and over again. And that gets ingrained into people's subconscious on a certain level. And so even not just people who are young, who didn't, really grow up with the WikiLeaks era, but people who are older have very short memories, and they think George Bush is a nice guy, and whatever.
He
And
gave Michelle Obama mints.
I know. And
He's
so
not a
it's
nice guy.
okay that he, committed these atrocious war crimes. That's fine. And Julian Assange is so mean for making him look bad. And that's kind of the attitude that has been ingrained in people. And it's really difficult to fight back against that. But at the same time, if you talk to people about the facts of the case, almost always you can change their minds. It's
Great.
very easy to show somebody the actuality of what happened, or especially, I mean, we've talked about this. The sexual assault charges are incredible, not charges, accusations are incredibly difficult to fight against. That's a very difficult subject to defend yourself against. But I think once you talk to people and you say, listen, I'm a believe survivors person, absolutely. But when the person being accused is the public enemy number one of every Five Eyes nation on the country, it's easy for me to imagine that that's something that they would use against him in order to make him look bad. And I think most people are smart enough to recognize that that is certainly a tactic that they would use. And then when they're presented with the actual evidence in that case, and they see what actually happened and how the two women were very much railroaded into even making this a thing, and that, Nils Melzner, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, has investigated this fully and has come to his own conclusion that this is a non-issue. It really is just a non-issue. A lot of people are receptive to that, and it's just the fact that they're not getting that information. That
or just because the UN's been pilloried since it came into existence, especially by, well, it's pretty bipartisan at this point.
Yeah.
It has been pretty bipartisan throughout history. But go ahead. My brain just melted.
You guys are all melty today. What's going on? But I think that, I mean, even no matter what you think of the UN, I think listening to Nils Melzer, he's a very educated man. He's a very thoughtful man. He's, highly intelligent, well-spoken. He's looked at the information. He is Swedish, so he is fluent in Swedish. So he has examined the actual police documents. He has looked through all of the evidence himself, and he has reached the conclusion that it's a non-issue. He actually gives me a great deal of hope, because he's probably one of the first people that made me realize that it was possible to talk about that subject and get people to change their minds. Because there was a while that I was very hesitant to even defend Julian on that, because it's a very kind of an icky, that's some dangerous waters to tread. But you just have to be very smart in how you approach it. But when he was first approached to look into Julian's case, he didn't want to, because he had also been sort of a victim of that propaganda campaign, and he kind of bought into all of the smears, and he forced himself to look into it anyway. And when he did and was presented with new evidence, he changed his mind. And I think that most people, when they're presented with real life, it's very easy for them to imagine that our government would do something like that to somebody. It's not like they haven't done it before and we don't know that that's true. So yeah, I think that that's why narrative is so critical. And that's why I fight so hard now against, especially the sexual assault claims, because that's all we have. If we can't fight back against the narrative, then we're never going to win. That really is everything.
I'm curious if you two, I recovered my thought. My brain reassembled itself. I'm curious if you two would agree that the UN, which, as I said, has been pilloried since its existence pretty much, because it has a stigma among so many people who don't understand its origins, its functions, who think it's some new tool of New World Order. I've encountered people who will say, well, it's just Nils Melzner from the UN. Who gives a shit what this guy has to say? It's one person. It's just his opinion. And it has to do with this stigma that's been incessantly perpetuated against the UN, which has many problems, I won't deny. But do you think that
I think that's probably part of it, but I think also it's probably a lot that people just have made up their minds about Julian Assange, and they're, just like he was, hesitant to hear new information. You're going to have that with anybody, I think. I don't know what you think, Sam.
I mean, I feel like I come from a very bad place for answering that question in that my whole life has existed in very, very shit libby spaces. So I'm used to people loving the UN too much, which is tedious. But on the bright side, it is convenient in this regard because a lot of people who would otherwise not support Assange, you can bring that up, and they're like, "Oh, well, then I actually may take it more seriously." Same with, I mean, I think
Interesting.
yeah,
Maybe I need to be
yeah.
talking to shit libs.
I feel like the weird shit lib whisper of the left. Not that I'm necessarily the best at moving them as left as I wish I was. But it is weird because I feel like a lot of people on the left come from either apolitical or like very right backgrounds. I ended up coming from the horrible, sort of fake progressive liberal areas, and I think I'd say that a lot of them genuinely are well-meaning. They're just in such a bubble. I also come from a weird one because I'm in a super red line district. So it's not like the liberals who are really, really in a bubble. Like they still have to experience other places. So I got lucky there. But yeah, no, it's about finding if you can find someone liberals take seriously. Obviously, a lot of them are now at the point where they call them Russian agents, no matter how long they've loved them before. But I think they're definitely, at least in my experience, have been people who are liberal and will still listen to liberals who are showing few and far between, but whatever liberals are showing, or liberal institutions are showing solidarity with Assange. I think that's been working pretty decently, at least on my end.
I just think the biggest problem we have with liberals is that they loved Julian Assange when he exposed George W. Bush, but when he exposed Hillary Clinton, they didn't like that so much, and so now they're totally willing to let him be persecuted and tortured to death because he made mother look bad. So that's not good.
Yeah,
That sort of partisanship bullshit is really kind of gross.
That's definitely the one that does the most damage. That's hardest to work around for
Yeah,
sure.
which is interesting because that has nothing to do with why he's being prosecuted. But many of them that I talk to really don't seem to care because he pissed them off by insulting mother and making her look bad, and so they just don't care. And they see that he's getting what he's got coming to him.
See,
And
I'm also weird because my town is very liberal, but it's like Warren Bernie liberal, which they have their own problems, but at the very least, it's a much different camp than Hillary Obama liberals.
mhm.
I live in
So I
Trump
don't
country,
claim
so
to
I
be an
get it.
expert. Okay, yeah, no, I don't want to claim that I have any specific knowledge. I can just speak to my experience that the like slightly left of center people tend to be decent at being shifted over to support Assange.
So
But
while we're actually talking about Assange, you actually had a really good idea, and I wanted you to talk about it a little bit before I forget to bring it up. You have been contacting different journalism schools around the country and trying to get them to speak on behalf of not just Assange, but the future of press freedom. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's going and how you're kind of going about contacting people?
Yeah, it is a mind-numbing task because every college website is horrible to search. But what I've been doing is I have a big Twitter thread, and where I'm keeping track of which ones I've contacted. I also have my emails. I have a list, Google Doc, where go state by state, look up, find as many journalism or at the very least communication schools in the state that I can find, write them down, find a point of contact, usually the dean or director. Sometimes, if that's impossible to find, I'll just go with whatever the listed contact is. But I typically like going for the higher up person since they make more decisions. Um, and then email them. I mean, it's taking a long time, but I've already gotten through quite a few states. I've been able to nag some friends and family members to help me out, who I'm very grateful to them. And I guess my long-term plan is I don't have a set deadline. I'd like to get it done within the next month. But who knows with my life. But yeah, I'm emailing them. And then if I don't hear back from a week, I'm going to send a follow-up email. And if I don't hear back from a week after that, I plan on adding them. And I am keeping track of every single school I contact, how they respond or don't respond. And I'm not expecting any of them to make a statement in defense of him, especially not state schools. Not that I think this is a perfect excuse, but I know there's a lot of state schools where they will lose funding if they make a statement for Julian Assange. I think that they should just take the L and do it, because I think that's more important. But private schools, I'm also not expecting them to do it. But that's my process. And my plan is that whenever I sent the emails to all the schools and then given them the 2 warnings, if I have not heard back, I'm just going to publish an article with here's what I did, here's what I think it says about my main point, which is the state of colleges and integrity in this country. And I'm going to list all of the contacts I'm going to give up after contacting them 3 times. Maybe not give up, but I'm not going to keep having them, but I'll list the contacts. So my plan is I'm hoping that either I can actually get some schools to speak out, and by doing so show their students that it's okay to speak out in defense of him. And if none of them do, or very few of them do, I can conveniently say, hey, everyone, you should be concerned that 1,000, it's probably going to be in the thousands, I'm guessing, 1,000 something journalism schools were contacted, given multiple opportunities to respond, and not a single one cared.
I'm a big fan of the public shaming. So yes, I like this plan a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great plan. Tedious as it sounds, I think it's a great plan, and you're really going after the people who should be in Julian's camp, who should, or if they're not in his camp, at least teaching their students about the story and what.
Well, and at least being concerned for the future of their profession. I mean, this is not, listen, I get it. I don't expect Chris Hayes to talk about this. Man is fully ingrained in the establishment. He faces no threat to any attack on journalism because he is a propagandist.
But he had Bernie on his show.
Yeah, well, that doesn't impress me.
No, I know.
Bernie doesn't impress me. Yeah, so I don't expect Rachel Maddow or Chris Hayes. First of all, they'd have to admit that their Russiagating is bullshit in order to cover the story in a real way. They're not going to do that. I mean, Tucker Carlson covered it, which is, take whatever you want from that. He's always been solid on this issue, though, if I'm being fair. But this isn't, to me, it's really bizarre. It's a very bizarre world we live in where I have to beg journalists to defend journalism.
Yeah, and just going to Tucker Carlson, too. He's had on Anya Parampil from the Gray Zone. I believe Max has been on.
Aaron's been on. Jim Moore's been on. Glenn Greenwald's been on.
He got someone to talk about Venezuela and defend Maduro.
Yeah, and that was my point. That look, Tucker Carlson, his show might not be the ideal platform on which you want to convey what's happening, but you're taking advantage of him. He's giving you the space, and so you can talk about.
Can I rant on that for a little bit? Because I honestly get so angry at people who get pissy when leftists go on Tucker Carlson. That man has a huge ass platform. And if Anya Parampil can go on Tucker Carlson's show and expose that audience to leftist ideas, I don't know why you're against that. That's dumb, and you're dumb, and you should shut up. Sorry, rant over. Sorry, that really just gets me mad.
No, I love that.
I mean, Glenn Greenwald went on Tucker Carlson and just crushed for Julian Assange.
Yeah, that was great.
The most brilliant 3 minutes of Julian Assange advocacy that I've seen in a while. He spoke directly to Donald Trump, spoke directly to his ego, said exactly what he needed to say. It was genius. And I'm never going to be angry at Glenn Greenwald for taking advantage of Tucker Carlson and his huge ass audience to push that agenda.
And that's Trump directly.
Yes. Yeah, he went right after Donald Trump. I mean, he wasn't speaking to anybody. If you watch it, he wasn't speaking to anybody but Donald Trump.
Hmm.
And Donald Trump watches Fox News. He watches Tucker Carlson. I think he's
Yeah.
a Carlson and a Hannity fan, and it's Carlson and then Hannity comes on next. So
Right.
he did it at the end of the show. So almost for sure, Donald Trump was watching, and he at least heard it. I don't know that that will make any difference, but the fact that Glenn Greenwald was able to get that message out to those viewers is a great thing to me, and I'm never going to be mad at him for that ever.
I don't want to make excuses for Trump because, one, he's a horrible person. No one's making excuses for him. Also, he absolutely, my understanding, could end it. But I do wonder a lot about how much of the not war. I mean, obviously he hates the press. I don't think you need to talk him into waging war on journalism. But I wonder how much of the actual strategic elements of the war on journalism are him. Because I still think he's too stupid to.
He's just a convenient bully for them.
He's absolutely the State Department's bitch.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think this is his agenda. I think that they know that they can use him because he doesn't care and he's willing to do things that nobody else was ever willing to do. Barack Obama was scared to go after Julian Assange, but Donald Trump is too stupid to know he should be a little hesitant to do so, and that it is a threat to the First Amendment. And so Donald Trump will do it. I mean, Obama didn't want that to be his legacy. Trump doesn't care. So yeah. I think he's just a convenient bully for them, to be honest.
Well, I think with that's maybe not all why, but definitely not all why, but a big part of why Glenn Greenwald can speak directly to Trump, be like, this would really, because at least from what I've seen of Trump, yeah, if he doesn't give a shit about Assange one way or the other, if he thinks that's what's going to benefit him, he absolutely would.
He's all about himself,
do it,
and that's why he offered Julian Assange the pardon. If you expose your source so that we can prove it wasn't Russia, and that'll get me a little bit off the case for this Russia shit, I'll give you a pardon. And Julian Assange is not going to expose his source. And it was like a month later that he was arrested and dragged out of the embassy because he wouldn't play ball. So that part of it might be a little bit more on Donald Trump. That might have been a little bit of, him being vindictive and, oh, you're not going to help me, so I'm going to make your life hell. That very well could be the case. He is a big child. So, I could definitely see that being his reaction. What's that?
I think that's part of it for sure.
Yeah.
And also, I wouldn't doubt if there's an allure to Trump in the form of, I could be the president, I could be the world leader who got Assange, the big fish, that sort of mentality. But I think Sam is right that aside from the vanity aspects of extraditing Assange, he doesn't give a shit about him one way or the other. Apparently, Trump is not a big reader, so I can't imagine him sitting down and putting in long periods of concentrated time to go through WikiLeaks and even have a basic understanding of what they do. So
I guarantee you the only opinion Trump has about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are received opinions. He doesn't have his own. I think you're right. The only thing he's ever heard about WikiLeaks is what happened in 2016, most likely. I'm sure that people have now since told him about collateral murder and the Afghanistan and Iraq war logs and the Guantanamo Bay files and all of that stuff. I don't think he probably understands any of it. I'm sure he's just been briefed. He's probably never looked through any of them, other than the ones maybe he's mentioned in, because I'm sure his vanity has made him go to WikiLeaks to search his name. I would not be surprised at all if that's happened. But yeah, I don't think he's not an ideologue. That's why he is at least approachable on this and other things. He's not an ideologue. He is in it for himself. If you can find an angle to convince him that it will benefit him, you can convince him to be on your side. You just have to be able to get in his ear, which is why Glenn Greenwald going on Tucker Carlson and speaking directly to his ego was genius.
Well, see, I was coming up from the pessimistic view, which is that not that Glenn Greenwald shouldn't go and talk straight to Trump, or that it doesn't make an impact. I think it absolutely does. But that I think the fact that Trump is the vessel and not the orchestrator is what makes it so hard to even if you could appeal to Trump. I just feel like I hate because as we talked about, I'm typically an optimistic person. I always think there's a way to solve the thing. But I do think that if we're going to solve this, it is very specifically the most powerful forces in government that we are up against. And while I think we absolutely should be trying to bring Trump over to be an asset to the fight for press freedom, as wild as that sounds, I don't think anyone should make the mistake that this has that he's the person who's going to be the big deciding
Well, I think to
point
be
on.
fair, there have been a couple of different times where Trump has gone against the grain. You know, especially in terms of foreign policy, I think that he has very much been pushed to be much more brutal in Syria, and you know, he definitely could have gone a lot farther than he has. I think there have been many times where he has shown at least a willingness to draw a line to some degree. I don't know. Again, it would have to be very much in his interest for him to really stick his neck out on any level. And I don't know that this will be an issue that he's willing to do that on. But I do think that he is at the very least reachable-ish.
I guess you guys probably understand better than I do. What I'm wondering is he actually able to end this?
Yes.
Because that's it. Okay, that's where I was confused. Because
he could absolutely right now drop the charges. That's his call. I mean, it really goes through Barr, who's the attorney general, but he is the president, and he does have the executive power to dictate to his administration what he wants done, and he could absolutely do that. He could have done it a long time ago. He's been talking about pardoning Edward Snowden. You know, there's a lot of debate currently over whether or not he has the ability to pardon Julian Assange, because Julian Assange is not a United States citizen. I find it to be a weird situation where, okay, he's not a United States citizen, so therefore isn't available to be pardoned, but it's okay to charge him under our laws. That seems like a little weird gray area of, you know, we think that we control the world and you're not, you have no rights under our laws, but we can punish you under our laws. That seems very strange.
Postmodern iteration of the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah, it's a very weird imperialist bully position where, you know, we think that we can control what journalists around the globe say, but they're not, you know, protected under our Constitution. That doesn't make any sense to me. And the fact that that's a thing that's happening is one of the biggest issues I have with the Assange case. And it's weird that more people aren't frustrated by that. But whether it's a pardon or he just drops the charges, it really doesn't matter to me. Again, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is going to be Julian Assange's savior. That's very unlikely. I'm saying that it is good for Tucker Carlson, or for, you know, Glenn Greenwald to go on Tucker Carlson and at least make that attempt. I think he's definitely, you know, the least influenced by deep state crap, because he did kind of come from the outside. He hasn't been a politician his entire life, where he's been kind of groomed into being a lapdog to these people. So that's, you know, the only benefit I can see to a Donald Trump. I don't think that he'll go that route. Like I have been saying for a very long time, if we truly wish to stop the extradition, it's going to take immense public pressure. I mean, armies of people speaking against it. That's the only thing. They have to know that people are watching and that it's not being ignored, and that that's something that they're going to get away with. Because if they think that they can get away with throwing this guy in a hole for, you know, the next however long he happens to survive, they'll do it. They will absolutely do that. So yeah, I don't think Trump will be, you know, cool enough to do what's supposed to be done, but at the very least we can make an appeal to him and the people who watch Tucker Carlson and are Trump voters. You know, if Trump voters would start holding him responsible for the promises he made about WikiLeaks and about free press and about, you know, combating fake news. Well, nobody combats fake news better than WikiLeaks. They've never gotten it wrong. So if you don't like fake news, WikiLeaks is your source. So it seems like that should be a pretty easy sell to make. So the more people that can go on Fox News and talk about that, the better. That's, always going to be good.
That's sort of what I'm thinking, because to sort of, I think I got the right phrasing for what I was trying to get at, is that like Trump is able to make the decision, but I also, as separate from the state as he is from a lot of other presidents, I don't doubt that the people in the state absolutely know how to work him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made as many concessions to them as he has. So I think, obviously, it's about what is it? It's about getting him to pardon or drop the charges. But it's going to take, it's like a tug of war. And right now, he is very, 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 very much being pulled over by the very, 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 very powerful team. And we need as many, many, many hands on the rope, our side of the rope, as we can get. And Glenn Greenwald is one very strong hand. But I think we need a lot. We're very, very behind in getting people on the rope. Gaining, I think, but
absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
And I think that it's, Chuck Schumer went on a Sunday morning news show and said, you don't mess with the intelligence agencies because they have 6 ways to Sunday to mess with you back. And I think that Trump very much knows that. I mean, Russiagate, hello. I mean, he spent the past 4 years defending himself against a fact-free, baseless conspiracy theory. He knows what they're capable of doing.
Right.
Did kind of win. He did kind of beat that back, though. So maybe he will be kind of encouraged to stand up more.
For that reason, since he spent the past 4 years in a tug of war with the DOJ, essentially, I don't think, at least before the election, he's going to want to initiate another tug of war with them.
If he's reelected, I could see him potentially doing something about it. If he loses, I could see this being something that, as he's out the door, as kind of a fuck you to Democrats, being like, I'm going to pardon Julian Assange and Ed Snowden.
That's the most compelling case to vote for Biden.
There's no case to vote for Biden.
That's true.
Not one I'm willing to make anyway.
I was going to ask both of you, actually, what do you think the prospects are for Julian if somehow a miracle of medicine happens and Joe Biden is made sane enough to be voted president?
Is that a miracle, though?
That was definitely sarcasm.
Yeah, I don't think that there's no change in how Julian Assange would be treated, in my opinion. Joe Biden is no advocate for free speech and free press, and I mean, he was the vice president under the most ridiculously, they went after journalists and whistleblowers like it was their job. I mean, worse than any other. It
would be worse for Julian Assange than it is now.
I mean, I don't know if it would be worse. I'm just saying for sure, I don't think it would be any better.
I also think there's a case that Kamala Harris would be even worse for him than Joe Biden would.
Absolutely.
I don't even have a take. I have just completely, maybe this is a mistake. I mean, 2020 is showing me that I can't predict anything, but I am convinced that Trump has won the election. I see absolutely, unless he were to die, I do not think that he is going to lose the election. Because
Democrats need a miracle. They need some kind of crazy October surprise out of nowhere, because I live in small town Ohio. I've seen a handful of Biden signs. There are homemade Trump signs on people's barns. People spent a weekend painting this shit,
I live in liberal country. There's we had a lot of Hillary signs in 2016. They were everywhere. There's I've seen from my entire town, maybe 10 Biden signs, maybe less. It's not going to be good for him at all.
He's an embarrassment to humanity, and people who support him with signs and stickers and vocally should be embarrassed of themselves and ashamed of themselves. And
I mean, both candidates, really. If you're supporting either one of them,
absolutely,
rethink your life choices,
But at least
I get holding your nose and like going in there and being like, oh my gosh, Trump is a racist and he's a sexist and he's a danger and whatever. I don't agree with that, but I get that fear. So I get going into the voting booth and voting for Joe Biden, but to slap a bumper sticker on your SUV or to put a yard sign up, you need to reevaluate yourself. It's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, it goes back to people not wanting to do the homework, or they don't have time to do the homework, the research, because they're working, they have families to take care of.
And once again, what they're being fed on mainstream media is crap. And they're not
Yeah.
educated. They don't know about Joe Biden's record. They don't know about the, Tara Reid story to the extent that they should. And they don't know about all of the horrible things that he said and done. And, it's really unfortunate. And it just really takes us back to, kind of where we started, where, journalism is in a really, really bad state right now. It's not good.
I don't want to open another, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Go ahead.
I don't want to open another rabbit hole, but also just foreign policy. Like, he is in a relay race with Trump to see who can be the more pro-war candidate.
It's insane,
and
isn't it?
I think he's winning. I think I think you can make a very valid case for both of them, especially Trump now.
Biden is to the right of Donald Trump on foreign policy. It's not even close. In my opinion, he is to the right.
See,
Absolutely.
I agree with that, but I also this week has been terrifying in terms of Trump as foreign policy president. I'm not expecting Biden would be better.
Listen,
but
Trump wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. Who stopped that? The Democrats.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe Biden is definitely to the right.
But the idea that you can have harm mitigation while, in terms of foreign policy, your candidate is worse is such a lacking in any understanding of how politics works. If war happens, which it will under Biden, and it will be really bad, you're not going to get improvements in healthcare, colleges, and all, because that money's going to be going to the military. You're not going to have any environmental improvements because there will be a lot of pollution from the military. You're not going to improve racism because a lot of Black and brown communities are going to be targeted by the military. So it's the idea that he's harm mitigation while he is more of a war hawk. It just shows that Americans need to follow foreign policy. Every single thing starts with foreign policy.
That is a very privileged position to take, to say that it only matters to me if I get health care, and I don't care about the Black and brown people that are going to be, hit by drones.
And you're not going to get health care.
Yeah,
like, obviously, you should center the people who are going to be terrorized by our wars first and foremost.
And let's be real, though.
Just to think you get health care.
Let's be real. We're talking about this like Joe Biden's going to be president, and he's not. Kamala Harris is going to be president, and she is arguably more terrifying in almost every respect. She's a cop, first of all. I mean, that's never good, especially not for, the Black and brown communities that she's already been terrorizing in California. That's just going to be nationwide now. And she's proven herself to be pretty hawkish. She doesn't speak a lot about foreign policy, but when she does, it's not great.
I would say she was one of the more hawkish candidates in the primary.
Yeah. And, it's really unfortunate that we live in a world where our president is somebody who didn't receive a single delegate. But that's the situation where we would find ourselves if Joe Biden was to be elected. But again, I don't think there's a chance in hell that Joe Biden is going to win this election. So that's just me. I don't like to make predictions. You're right. 2020 is crazy. Anything could happen. But barring like a really significant situation or some big release that comes out that exposes something, and even then, watching the stuff that Trump's been allowed to get away with and that his supporters kind of don't seem to care about, and he can just say and do whatever he wants, and they just seem to support him even more. I'm not even sure what could take him down at this point. I mean, he gets away with everything. So, and his base is motivated. Like they're out there knocking doors, and Joe Biden, he doesn't want to win. Let's be real. They're fine with Trump. The dude doesn't even have campaign offices in swing states. He's not trying to win. He's not campaigning. He didn't speak to the press after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. He called it. Like he called his day at like 9 a.m. and didn't speak. I mean, he hides in the basement. He doesn't do public appearances. He only gives scripted interviews. They're not knocking doors. They're not doing phone banking. They don't have campaign offices in critical states. He's not trying to win. It would be you. I don't know how anybody is convinced that he is, but it's okay because he's not going to. And I think that that's fine with Democrats. Trump is best case scenario for them. He's great for fundraising. They don't have to actually do anything. They don't have to govern. They don't have to fake, oh, we can't do healthcare because of this. And they don't have to kind of try to convince everybody that they're trying really hard, but they just can't get it done. They can just blame everything on Republicans. And, they can, fundraise a shit ton of money off of Orange Man bad. And that's the ideal situation for them. It's,
and the
it's
states where they win, they're secure.
Yes. That's all that matters. All that matters to them. And I think that if it is not abundantly clear that all that matters to both major parties in this country is destroying the left, I don't know what else it's going to take. 2016 should have made it readily apparent, but 2020, they spent more time trying to destroy Bernie Sanders than they have ever spent on trying to destroy Donald Trump. And I just don't know what else it's going to take to see that both of these parties are owned and operated by the exact same people, and their only mission in life is to destroy any shift to the left.
Mm-hmm. This is quite remarkable. The collateral murder video came out in May of 2010, correct?
Mm-hmm.
In December of 2010, The Guardian published this article, Julian Assange like a high-tech terrorist, says Joe Biden. That's word for word what Mitch McConnell said not too long ago. And
that's not surprising.
That speaks perfectly to your point that both sides they have an investment and even a bloodlust to see Assange go down for good.
He exposes them. This is not somebody they want running around. The deep state or whatever, he is enemy number one for them. He's giving people proof of their wrongdoing, and that's not something that they enjoy much. It messes with their money game and their power game, and it's sick that that's what it's all about, and that we've allowed the worst among us to reach positions of power, to have that sort of influence, but that's where we are. And the only people who was exposing them was Julian Assange, and he's now locked in a supermax. So either we fight for him, or we need to just be okay with the fact that our government is insane, like run by psychopaths. That's not hyperbole. Run by psychopaths who are okay with genocide and murder and drone strikes, and that we're never going to know what they're doing. We just are giving them all of the power in the world to do whatever they want, and we'll never know. So, this is, like I've always said, the whole Assange case is so much bigger than just that one man. And that's something that I think, that's an angle I think that really has an effect on people when you're speaking with them about it. Because if you remove Julian Assange and everything surrounding him and the things that he exposed, it really is battle for press freedom at this point.
I agree. And I think that's a good place to leave it. We've been going on for...
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much of Sam's time. Before we go though, Sam, can you tell people where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find your work, where they can find your podcast, all of that stuff? So, and we'll put all that stuff in the show notes too, but just kind of rattle off where people can find you at.
Yes, thank you. So the main thing I would plug is my podcast, which is at Newsdive Radio on Twitter. We have usually an episode a week, and when we're not doing that, we are retweeting news that we think is important, which has been almost entirely Assange news. I also really want to plug our Instagram, which is also at Newsdive Radio, because I have two friends who are very graciously helping with the design, which I'm awful at, and they deserve a lot of credit. And we have, whenever we want to cover international news, they make some nice design for getting info out. We're going to try to do more Instagram Live with people who are doing unique projects. So that's how you can follow our social media, and you'll see the show advertised. But if you don't see the show advertised, you can follow it anchor.fm/newsdive, or look up Newsdive on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the other ones. I do write sometimes. I don't actually know my Medium page off the top of my head, but my
Like it.
personal account is at Sam in the can, all one word. And every now and then I share articles. That's also where you can see the giant, massive thread of colleges that I've reached out to, and where I'll be giving updates on which ones I've followed up with and have or haven't heard back from.
Great. And
Cool.
we'll link to your Medium site and your latest piece in the show notes as well.
Of course.
And any closing words you'd like to impart?
I've talked to Misty about this. I guess I haven't had a chance to say it to you that this show, the episode you did with Taylor Hudak and Mohammed Almazi, was like, there were a few influences, but that was probably the main influence that made me start prioritizing Assange coverage. So I just wanted to say it is super cool to have been able to actually be a guest on this show, and
Awesome.
I appreciate both of your work. It's really good quality.
Thank you. That means a
That's
lot
really,
to both of
yeah,
us.
that's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd love to have you back on as your project advances
Absolutely.
with the schools and see what's going on with that. So, Sam, thank you very much for joining us today on Facts on the Ground. Sam Carliner has been our guest. He's an independent journalist and press freedom activist. He focuses on foreign policy and breaking up media monopolies. And he is, as he mentioned, a host of a podcast himself called Newsdive, which focuses on covering underreported news and emphasizing problems in press freedom and media ethics. And as a journalist who's just starting out, as he's let us know, he's focusing on finding ways to make it easier for young journalists to work as independent journalists rather than being funneled into the corporate journalist outlets. So, Sam, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care.